Claire spotted the man who would be her client for the night, and an overwhelming urge to turn and walk away seized her. But she knew she couldn't. Failure wasn't an option, not when her family's home depended on it. If she backed out now, they would be evicted without a second chance. Taking a slow, steadying breath, she squared her shoulders and forced her feet forward. The confidence in her stride was carefully crafted, her beauty undeniable, yet inside she felt hollow. The tight, revealing dress clung to her curves, the fabric cool against her smooth back as she approached the table where her client sat. "Looks like you got lucky tonight, sir. You snagged yourself a gorgeous date," one of his companions teased, smirking. The heavy-set man exhaled a cloud of smoke and stubbed his cigar out in the ashtray before shifting in his seat to make room for her. "Sit down, baby girl," he said with a wide, satisfied grin. Claire plastered on a smile, one she had perfected over the past year, a mask of warmth that hid the revulsion curdling inside her. She lowered herself gracefully onto the seat beside him. "What do you want to drink?" he asked, throwing one thick arm around her shoulders, his fingers trailing lazily down her bare arm. As he leaned in, she caught the scent of whiskey and tobacco, an all-too-familiar combination. His breath was warm, heavy, and invasive, and the way he sniffed at her like a dog made her stomach twist. She had long since learned how to suppress her disgust. The money was all that mattered. Anything will do, Mr. Brown," she replied, flashing him a bright, effortless smile. "I drink whatever." He chuckled, clearly pleased, and gestured to a nearby waitress, ordering the most expensive liquor on the menu. Claire noted how he flaunted his wealth, not just in the way he dressed, his suit tailored to accommodate his massive frame, but in the way he ordered round after round of drinks without hesitation. That was exactly what she needed. She encouraged him to drink more, laughing at his jokes, brushing her fingers against his arm, pretending to be enamored by his presence. By the time midnight rolled around, he was thoroughly intoxicated. His speech slurred, his movements sluggish. "Hey, let's take this somewhere more private," he mumbled, gesturing for his driver. This was the moment Claire had been waiting for. She feigned excitement as his driver pulled up in a sleek black car, helping Mr. Brown inside. He was nearly dead weight now, his head lolling against the seat. When they arrived at the luxury hotel he had booked, Claire made a show of struggling under his weight. Hey, could you help me bring him upstairs?" she asked the driver, flashing him a grateful smile. The man nodded and, without hesitation, draped one of Mr. Brown's thick arms over his shoulder, half dragging him toward the elevator. Claire followed, subtly slipping the key card from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. As they entered the lavish suite, Mr. Brown let out a drunken laugh, his eyelids heavy. "Bab baby, come to daddy," he slurred, reaching for her with clumsy hands. Claire quickly turned to the driver. "You can come back for him in the morning, thank you." The man gave her a curt nod before stepping out, leaving her alone with her unconscious client. She exhaled and took in her surroundings. The hotel room reeked of extravagance, crystal chandeliers, plush furniture, a fully stocked bar. Mr. Brown had spared no expense. Now all she had to do was finish what she came here for. "Claire, where are you? I want to eat you, baby." His groggy voice called out from the bedroom, thick with lust and alcohol. The way he said it made her stomach churn. He sounded like he thought she was a piece of crispy fried pork. Something greasy and sizzling, meant to be devoured without a second thought. Claire stepped into the dimly lit bedroom, where she found him already loosening his tie. His heavy-set body swayed slightly, and his bloated stomach pushed against the straining waistband of his expensive pants. When he undid the button, she had to suppress a grimace. If he pinned her down, she feared she might suffocate under his weight. Still, she forced a sultry smile and climbed onto the bed, reaching for his shirt buttons with practiced ease. "Yes, that's it, baby," he murmured, his lips curling into a lazy grin, eyes closed as if savoring the moment. For a fleeting second, she considered knocking him out with a single punch. The overpowering stench of sweat, whiskey, and cigar smoke clung to him, and she imagined his skin would taste just as bad, salty and stale. His thick, clammy hands landed on her thighs, fingers squeezing greedily. "Ride me, baby," he growled. Claire barely resisted the urge to recoil. Instead, she smoothly reached for his wallet, flipping it open with her thumb. The sight of crisp US dollar bills made her heart race. But not in the way he thought. "Jackpot," she murmured under her breath. The drug she had slipped into his drink earlier should have knocked him out by now, but instead, he was still groaning, still reaching for her. His sluggish movements made it clear that the sedative was working, just too slowly for her liking. "Baby, touch my boobies," he slurred, lifting his trembling hands toward her chest. Claire caught his wrists and placed his palms where he wanted, feigning a moan just loud enough to be stored somewhere in his foggy memory by morning. Meanwhile, her other hand worked swiftly, slipping the cash from his wallet into her purse. She moved on top of him just enough to keep him distracted, her body barely shifting against his. Even through his trousers, she could feel him, small, unimpressive, barely registering beneath her. Leaning in close, she whispered, "Does this feel good?" A long guttural moan escaped his lips. "You're taking too long, baby," he whined, his frustration mixing with the slur of his words. Claire's pulse quickened. The drug should have knocked him out completely by now. Had she miscalculated? If he sobered up too much, he might still have enough strength to overpower her. She never actually slept with her clients. That wasn't part of the job. The routine was always the same. Get them drunk, lure them to a hotel, strip them down just enough to sell the illusion, take what she needed and leave before they woke up. But tonight, something was off. His half-lidded eyes suddenly snapped open. Before she could react, he flipped her onto her back, his massive body caging her in. "Mr. Brown," she purred, keeping her voice playful despite the spike of panic in her chest. "Let's play a little first, to make this more exciting." "Later," he rasped. His hot breath reeked of whiskey as he loomed over her. "I want to get my fill of you first." Claire's eyes widened as Mr. Brown lurched forward, aiming for her lips. She turned her head just in time, and his wet, alcohol-tainted mouth landed on her neck instead. His hands were already working at the straps of her dress, pushing them off her shoulders as his lips trailed down toward her collarbone. "No way I'm letting this slob be the first to have me," she thought, disgust coiling in her stomach. Her body tensed as she braced herself. With a swift, practiced movement, she drove her knee straight into his groin. A guttural, agonized grunt tore from his throat as he collapsed onto her, his massive weight briefly pinning her down before he rolled onto his side, clutching himself. "You..." he gasped, rage flashing in his hazy eyes. Claire didn't wait for him to recover. She scrambled off the bed, grabbed her shoes, and shot a quick glance back. The drug was finally taking full effect. His body was sluggish, his glare unfocused, his movements labored. But he was still conscious. She bolted for the door. "Claire!" he bellowed, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. She didn't stop. She shoved her heels onto her feet while sprinting down the hotel corridor, the carpet swallowing the sharp clicks of her steps. The elevator was just ahead. She desperately jabbed the button, willing the doors to open faster. "Claire?" Mr. Brown's voice echoed again, slurred but insistent. He was still coming. Ding! The elevator door slid open and Claire rushed inside, only to find she wasn't alone. A man stood in the center of the elevator, tall and poised, dressed in a sharp business suit that fit his lean frame perfectly. His gray eyes were piercing, his nose aristocratic, his entire presence radiating quiet power. If she hadn't heard Mr. Brown's enraged shout behind her, she might have lingered, admiring him a little longer. He gave her a slow once-overs, his expression unreadable. Claire instinctively flashed him a sweet, practiced smile before stepping inside and pressing the button for the ground floor. Without hesitation, she positioned herself behind him, using his presence as a shield. He smelled incredible, like fresh cedar wood and expensive cologne. "If my clients looked like this, I might actually cave for one night," she mused. Before she could process that thought, a thick, meaty hand shot between the elevator doors, forcing them apart. Mr. Brown, even through his disoriented state, he had managed to stumble after her, his bloated fingers adorned with that ridiculous gaudy ring. He was fighting the pull of the sedative, sheer willpower keeping him upright. "This is my chance." Out of hesitation, Claire reached up and tapped the well-dressed man's shoulder. The moment he turned to her, she met his gaze and whispered, "Sir, I need to borrow your lips for a second." Then she yanked him down by his tie and kissed him, her arms wrapped around his neck, molding herself against him as if they were lovers caught in an intimate moment. The doors slid open, and from Mr. Brown's vantage point, all he would see was a tall, commanding man passionately kissing the woman he had just paid for. Claire was ready to pull away, but then she felt the stranger's hand glide down her thigh. With a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted her leg around his waist and deepened the kiss. Heat flooded through her, not from attraction, but from the sheer audacity of the situation. Who the hell was this man? A feeble, disoriented whisper broke through the tension. Claire, Mr. Brown, the drug had finally won, and Claire, with her lips still locked against the stranger's, could taste victory. Panic surged through Claire. Mr. Brown wasn't convinced after all. She began to pull away from the handsome stranger's lips, but to her surprise, he didn't let go. Instead, he drew her closer, his grip firm yet effortless, as if their kiss was the most natural thing in the world. His lips moved against hers with unhurried confidence, deepening the moment, savoring it like something rich and intoxicating. The elevator doors finally slid shut, and as it descended, Claire hesitantly opened her eyes. He was still kissing her. This man, this stranger, was kissing her as if he actually wanted to, like she wasn't just using him as a convenient escape. His embrace was steady, his scent alluring, and, for a fleeting second, Claire forgot why she was even there. This is my first kiss, and it's turning out to be an amazing experience. The thought made her chest tighten, but she knew she had to end it before things went further. Summoning her resolve, she broke free, lowering her leg and putting space between them. Her heart pounded as she stepped back, smoothing down her dress. The stranger, however, remained composed, his expression unreadable, as if nothing had happened. She flashed him a small, teasing smile. "Thanks for saving me." He didn't say a word, just gave her a slow nod, his gaze lingering. The elevator chimed as it reached the ground floor. Without another glance, Claire turned and hurried out, leaving him behind. By the time she arrived home, the house was silent. It was past midnight and her family was already asleep. Exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. As she quietly freshened up, washing away the night's tension before brushing her teeth. Slipping into bed, she exhaled deeply, relief washing over her. At least now she had enough money to pay 3 months' rent. No one would be kicking them out of their tiny, rundown rental anytime soon. The next morning, trouble found her before breakfast. Word had spread at the club about how she had slipped away from Mr. Brown, and management wasn't pleased. They summoned her, making it clear that if she didn't show up, she'd be out of a job. For Claire, that wasn't an option. The Ember Lounge was her main source of income. If she got fired, there would be no way to support her younger siblings' schooling or help her parents cover their bills. Her father's odd jobs barely brought in enough, and her mother stayed home to care for the little ones. Claire had taken it upon herself to shoulder as much of the financial burden as she could. After counting her earnings, she handed the cash to her mother. "Mom, go pay off our debt to Mr. Terry," she said softly. "Then use the rest for groceries." Her mother's tired eyes softened with gratitude. "I need to go to the club for a meeting." "Take care, honey. Thank you for everything." Claire smiled. Helping her family in any way she could was the only thing that truly made her happy. They believed she was just a waitress at the club, and at first that had been true. But then Miss Lyra, the club owner, had noticed Claire's beauty, had seen potential in her. She had offered Claire a higher-paying position, one that required her to entertain customers rather than just serve them drinks. It had been the only way to survive. Even so, as she approached Ember Lounge that morning, nerves crept into her stomach. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, pausing in front of Miss Lyra's office. Taking a deep breath, she knocked, then pushed open the door. Miss Lyra sat perched on the edge of her desk, her long legs crossed, while her boyfriend, Ethan, leaned in close, murmuring sweet nothings into her ear. A sultry smile tugged at her lips, but the moment she spotted Claire standing at the doorway, her expression soured into a scowl. "Sit," she ordered curtly. Claire obeyed, sliding into the chair opposite her. Miss Lyra hopped off the desk, smoothing down the silk of her dress before settling into her leather swivel chair. She tilted her head, studying Claire like a predator sizing up its prey. "Do you have any idea what you did to your client last night?" Claire opened her mouth, scrambling for words. I'm sorry, Miss Lyra, because..." A sharp smack cut her off as Miss Lyra's palm slammed against the desk. "Sorry?" she snapped, eyes narrowing. "You nearly busted Mr. Brown's, goods." And all you have to say is sorry? You should be grateful I managed to smooth things over with him. Otherwise, you wouldn't just be out of a job. He could have sued you. You get that?" Claire swallowed hard, keeping her gaze lowered. She didn't regret what she had done, not for a second, but she also knew better than to provoke Miss Ilara, and, who had been lazily tracing circles on Miss Ilara's arm, chuckled. "Honey Peach, don't be too hard on her," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the curve of her ear. "Maybe she just wasn't into Mr. Brown." Miss Ilara rolled her eyes and pushed him away with a smirk. "Can it? I'm busy." Then, shifting her focus back to Claire, she sighed. "You're suspended for a month." Claire's stomach dropped. "You're lucky I have a soft spot for you," Miss Ilara continued, tapping her manicured nails against the desk. "If it were up to me, I'd fire you on the spot. But I know how hard things are for you and your family. Don't let this happen again. Understood?" Tears pricked at Claire's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let them spill. Instead, she lifted her chin and nodded. "Thank you, Miss Ilara. You're a lifesaver." Miss Ilara scoffed. Yeah, anyway, even though you're suspended, I've got a job for you." Claire stiffened. "What kind of job?" Miss Ilara pulled open a drawer, retrieving a slim envelope before sliding it across the desk. "Go to this restaurant tonight, 7 p.m. sharp." Claire hesitated before taking the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. "Look for Mrs. Genevieve," Miss Ilara continued. "She has a reservation. Tell her I sent you, and that you're there to do the job she needs done. Don't ask questions. Don't hesitate. She's paying a lot of money if you pull it off." Curious, Claire peeked inside the envelope. Her breath hitched. $400. Her hands tightened around the envelope as she looked up, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What exactly is this for?" "That's just the down payment," Miss Ilara said, leaning back in her chair. "Mrs. Genevieve will pay you another $1,600 when the job is done. Do this right, and you walk away with a full $2,000. Claire's breath hitched. $2,000? Her mind reeled. Who on earth would pay that much for a job like this? With that money, she could finally move her family somewhere safer, somewhere without leaky ceilings and paper-thin walls. There'd even be enough left over for groceries, school fees, maybe even a few small luxuries they hadn't dared dream about in years. Miss Ilara's sharp gaze cut through her thoughts. "Don't disappoint me, Claire. If you screw this up, I won't just suspend you. I'll fire you. Permanently. Got it?" Claire nodded quickly. "Yes, Miss Ilara, thank you. I'll head out now." Miss Ilara barely acknowledged her as she turned back to Ethan, pulling him into a heated kiss. Claire took that as her cue to leave. She hurried home, pushing aside her nerves. This was an opportunity, one she couldn't afford to waste. After locking her bedroom door, she carefully stashed the envelope beneath her clothes in a drawer. Then she changed into high-waisted jeans and a fitted red crop top, accentuating her curves without looking too obvious. A touch of heavy makeup, perfectly straightened hair. If she was going to meet someone rich, she had to look the part. At the restaurant, she approached the hostess. "I'm looking for Mrs. Genevieve. I have an appointment with her." The staff nodded and led her toward a private dining room. Claire knocked, then stepped inside. A woman sat elegantly at the table, poised and composed. Claire had expected a man, someone sleazy, given how dressed up she was, but this woman radiated authority. "Good evening," Claire greeted, smoothing her tone to sound polished. Mrs. Genevieve's eyes swept over her from head to toe, assessing. Claire met her gaze and stated confidently, "I'm Claire. Miss Ilara sent me." "Sit," Mrs. Genevieve instructed, her voice clipped and serious. Claire slid into the chair across from her, nerves prickling along her spine. "Before we discuss the details, allow me to introduce myself," the woman began. "I'm Linda Genevieve, owner of Heaven Inn. The job I have for you is simple. Make my son, William, fall for you. I need him to call off his engagement." Claire's stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" Mrs. Genevieve folded her hands together, unfazed by Claire's shock. "I believe his fiancée is only after his money. However, if I interfere directly, it will drive him closer to her. That's where you come in. I need you to seduce him. Make him want to leave her. If you can accomplish that, you'll receive the remaining $1,600. And if you do it discreetly, I'll even throw in a bonus." Now, will you take the job?" Claire hesitated, her stomach twisting. Could she really do this? What if William and his fiancée truly loved each other? What if she wasn't just breaking up a relationship but destroying something real? What if I can't split them up before the wedding?" she asked, hoping for an out. Mrs. Genevieve's lips thinned. "Just give it your best shot," she said firmly. Claire exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But in the end, she had no choice. "This is for my family." "All right," she murmured. "I'll do it." Mrs. Genevieve slid a document across the table. "Sign this. A written agreement stating that once the job is done, you'll never see William again." That was fine. She didn't plan on sticking around once she had the money. Claire signed without hesitation. She had exactly 1 month, 3 days later. A sleek black car pulled up outside her rundown apartment. Claire barely had time to say goodbye to her family before the driver ushered her inside and took off toward the Genevieve estate. Her official role? A live-in nanny for William's niece, Isabella. The child was supposedly very close to him, practically raised by him after her father's passing. Her mother had died young, leaving Isabella in the care of her grandmother and uncles. Mr. Genevieve believed this job would give Claire constant access to William, plenty of opportunities to make him notice her. As the car pulled up to the estate, Claire's jaw nearly dropped. The house, no, mansion, loomed before her like something out of a movie. It wasn't just big. It was palatial, with sprawling lawns, towering columns, and windows that gleamed under the midday sun. "They're filthy rich." She swallowed hard. One day she hoped to buy her family a real home. Not something this extravagant, but at least a place where they wouldn't have to worry about the landlord knocking on their door every month. A uniformed guard opened the gate and gestured her inside. "They're expecting you at the pool area," he said, his tone professional, as if he had already been briefed. Claire followed the stone pathway to the backyard where a sparkling pool stretched beneath the bright sky. Mrs. Genevieve stood near the edge, her posture crisp and commanding. "Good, you're early," she said, barely looking up. She pointed to the shallow end of the pool, where a little girl was splashing around. "That's Isabella. She's the one you'll be taking care of." Claire turned her gaze to the child, a small, curly-haired girl who couldn't be older than 4. "Isabella, come here, baby," Mrs. Genevieve called. The little girl waddled toward them, her wet curls bouncing. She blinked up at Claire with wide, curious eyes. "She's your new nanny, Claire," Mrs. Genevieve announced. Claire knelt to the child's level, her voice warm and gentle. "Hi, Isabella. I'm Claire." Years of caring for her younger siblings had made her good with kids. She smiled, hoping this part of the job would be easier than the rest. "Hi, Claire. I'm Isabella, but you can call me Cutie," the little girl chirped, flashing a toothy grin. "Are you going to play with me?" Claire couldn't help but smile at the child's energy. At least, this part of the job won't be so bad. Before she could respond, Mrs. Genevieve signaled for a staff member to show Claire to her room. A kindly older woman stepped forward, her demeanor warm and welcoming. "I'm Sarah. I've been working for Mrs. Genevieve for a long—" She paused mid-sentence and gestured to a door. "This is your room." Claire glanced at the door. It looked like every other one in the hallway. As Sarah pushed it open, Claire stepped inside, surprised by the coziness of the space. A neatly made bed, soft lighting, and a dresser stood against the wall. A small but elegant private bathroom was tucked in the corner. "So I get my own room?" Claire asked, setting her bag down. Sarah nodded with a kind smile. "Yes, we each have our own room and bathroom. Everything's comfortable here. Soft bed, air conditioning. They treat employees well as long as you do your job. If things go smoothly, you might even become a permanent staff member." Claire appreciated the reassurance. At least she wouldn't be sleeping in some cramped shared space. "Thanks, Sarah," she said genuinely. Sarah gave her an encouraging pat on the shoulder before leaving Claire to settle in. She unpacked her clothes, neatly folding them into the dresser. Knowing she'd be here for a month, she wanted to at least make the space feel a little like home. The money Mrs. Genevieve had given her was already with her mother, enough to cover their expenses while she was gone. With that done, she decided to check in with Mrs. Genevieve about anything Isabella might need. The older woman led her to Isabella's room, pushing open the door to reveal what could only be described as chaos. Toys were strewn across the floor, stuffed animals piled in one corner, and tiny dresses crumpled over the bed. Dolls and coloring books were scattered haphazardly, making the room look like a tornado had passed through. Claire blinked. "This is going to take some work. You'll need to tidy this room every day," Mrs. Genevieve instructed, her voice firm. William hates clutter, and before Isabella goes to bed, he usually checks in on her. "Make sure this room is spotless. How you manage that is up to you. But don't let William figure out what you're really here for." Claire nodded. "Understood, Mrs. Genevieve." She wasted no time getting to work, gathering the toys, folding clothes, and replacing the bed sheets with fresh ones. "If William likes things neat, I'd better keep this place immaculate." The room was back in order. Sarah invited her to lunch with the other staff. To Claire's relief, they were friendly and welcoming, chatting easily as they ate. After lunch, she returned to Isabella's room, ready to keep the little girl entertained. She found Isabella sitting cross-legged on the floor, brushing her Barbie's hair while simultaneously pulling out more toys and scattering them across the rug. Claire sighed, watching her hard work unravel in minutes, but she reminded herself this was part of the job. "Isabella," she said, keeping her tone light, "what time does your Uncle William come home?" The little girl's bright eyes sparkled at the mention of his name. Isabella shrugged. "I don't know, maybe later." Claire leaned in, her tone turning sugary sweet. "Your uncle must be really handsome, right?" The little girl paused mid-play, her face lighting up. "Yes, how did you know? He's like a prince, but his girlfriend is a witch. She's always so mean to me." Claire's eyes gleamed with interest. "A witch, huh? That might work to my advantage," she feigned curiosity, tilting her head. "Really? A witch, you say?" Isabella nodded fiercely. "She doesn't like it when Uncle plays with me, and she always tells me to go away when he's around." Claire bit back a smirk. "If he's as good-looking as the rumors say, maybe pulling this off won't be so hard. I just hope I don't end up actually falling for him." As night fell, Claire helped tuck Isabella into bed, smoothing down her blankets before heading to her own room for a quick shower. Freshly bathed, she decided to spend the night in Isabella's room, just in case the child woke up. She curled up on the floor, using an extra pillow and blanket from the closet. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but compared to the tiny apartment she'd grown up in, the plush carpeting and cool air conditioning felt like luxury. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, William was out late. He arrived home around 10, moving through the quiet house with practiced ease. Without fail, he always checked in on Isabella before going to bed. Entering her room, he walked to her bedside and adjusted her blanket, brushing a hand over her forehead. Satisfied, he was about to leave when... snore. His brows furrowed. Isabella didn't snore like that. The sound came again, deep and ungraceful. He bent down slightly to check, but Isabella's mouth was firmly shut. Confused, he followed the noise to the other side of the bed, only to trip over something soft and warm. With no time to catch himself, he tumbled forward, landing face first onto someone's body. "Ow! My foot!" came a startled female voice. A frantic rustling followed as both scrambled upright. Claire, heart pounding, snatched her phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim glow cast shadows across their faces as their eyes met. She barely had time to process his features before he spoke. "You?" His voice was low, incredulous. He stared at her as if trying to confirm she was real. "I remember you." Claire's breath hitched. No way. The sharp lines of his jaw, those piercing eyes, there was no mistaking it. He was the man from that night. The one she had once pulled in for a reckless, impulsive kiss inside an elevator. Her mind spun. Acting fast, she grabbed his arm, tugging him out into the hallway before Isabella could wake up. She pressed him against the wall and whispered fiercely, "You're William? You're Isabella's uncle?" "Yes, I am," William said, his gaze sharp. "And you? What's your name? Why are you in my house? Are you the new nanny?" Claire swallowed, trying to compose herself. "Yes, I'm Claire. I just started a few days ago," he finished for her, arms folding across his chest. His expression was unreadable. "Small world. Just a couple of nights ago I was wondering who you were. Now you're standing in front of me, wearing pajamas." His eyes flickered over her, taking in the difference. Gone was the bold, alluring woman from the elevator. Instead, she stood before him, fresh-faced, damp hair falling over her shoulders, dressed in an oversized t-shirt and shorts. The contrast was almost amusing. Claire's pulse quickened. I'm sorry about that elevator incident, she stammered. He arched an eyebrow. Mind explaining why you did it? Who was chasing you? Was he your boyfriend? Her head shook so fast that her hair fanned out. No, I swear, I didn't even know that guy. William's gaze darkened with skepticism. Then why kiss me? Because... She hesitated, then tried a playful smile. You're handsome, and I just gave in to temptation. His lips quirked. Really? So every time you see someone as handsome as me, you jump them? Heat crept up Claire's neck. I had a crush on you in that moment, she blurted, then quickly added, it was my first kiss, you know. His expression shifted, half amused, half doubtful. His sharp gaze lingered on her as if trying to gauge the truth in her words, but after a moment, he let it slide. Fine, he muttered. Well, thanks for taking care of Isabella. Good night. Good night, sir, Claire replied, then, on impulse, added with a teasing grin, you smell good tonight. Sleep well? William paused briefly, but said nothing, turning and walking away with an air of quiet confidence. Claire exhaled as she stepped back into Isabella's room. Sinking onto the carpet, this unexpected reunion had drained her more than she'd like to admit. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows as Isabella woke up bright and early. Wasting no time, she climbed onto William's bed and began bouncing enthusiastically. Uncle William, get up! You promised to make me pancakes, she chirped. William groaned but chuckled, sitting up to ruffle her hair. All right, I'm up. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms and carried her downstairs. Just as they reached the hallway, Claire emerged from her room, looking slightly flustered. Where's Isabella? I was looking for her, she said. Isabella piped up cheerfully. I'm with Uncle William. Didn't you ask me yesterday if he was handsome? Claire's eyes widened in horror as a blush crept up her cheeks. You little monkey, she muttered under her breath, playfully ruffling Isabella's hair before hurrying after them. In the kitchen, William lifted Isabella onto a stool at the kitchen counter, rolling up his sleeves as he reached for the pancake ingredients. Claire lingered nearby, watching as he moved effortlessly through the space, measuring flour and cracking eggs with practiced ease. She's so lucky her uncle even makes her breakfast, Claire murmured to Isabella, more to herself than anyone else. Isabella grinned proudly. Of course, that's why I love him so much. William turned his head, his expression softening. I love you too, baby, he said, gently tapping her nose. Then, his gaze flickered toward Claire and caught her staring. She quickly looked away, fumbling with a spoon and nearly knocking it off the counter. With a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, he turned back to the stove. Do you want maple syrup or chocolate? He asked Isabella. Chocolate, she squealed without hesitation. Claire watched as he poured the batter into the pan, flipping each pancake with effortless precision. She tried to act indifferent, but the way he moved, so relaxed, so capable, made it hard to ignore him. A few minutes later, he set down 3 neatly stacked plates, drizzling chocolate syrup over Isabella's portion before pouring himself Without a word, he slid a portion in front of Claire as well. She hesitated before taking a bite. The warmth of the pancakes melted in her mouth, perfectly fluffy, the chocolate just the right amount of sweet. This is so good, she admitted, surprised. William arched a brow. You sound shocked. Didn't expect me to know how to cook? Honestly? She smiled. Not really. After breakfast, with their meal finished, Claire stood to clear the dishes. Isabella trailed behind, humming a cheerful tune as she helped. William remained seated for a moment, fingers drumming lightly against his coffee cup. Then, without warning, he got up and followed Claire to the sink. Claire, he murmured, his voice lower now. She turned just in time to see the intensity in his eyes. Tell me who that guy in the elevator was, the one who chased you. Her body stiffened. I already told you, he wasn't my boyfriend. That's not what I asked. His arms crossed, his expression unreadable. It must have been serious for you to do something so drastic. She forced a light laugh. I told you, I just found you handsome. William didn't flinch, his gaze locked onto hers, reading her too easily. You're not much of an actress, he finally said, then shrugged. But anyway, thanks for helping out with Isabella. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving Claire gripping the edge of the counter, letting out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That afternoon, as Claire passed by the study, she overheard William on the phone. His deep voice carried through the slightly ajar door. "Yes, love, the honeymoon resort confirmed our booking," he said. A pause. "And the condo should be ready by next week. We'll set it up before the wedding." Claire's steps slowed. Wedding. Honeymoon. A shared home. The words gnawed at her, making her mission feel heavier than before. By the pool. Later that day, Claire and Isabella were outside playing catch near the pool. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the yard, laughter filling the air as they tossed the ball back and forth. "Ready, cutie?" Claire teased, throwing a gentle pass. "Ready?" Isabella giggled, catching it with ease. But when she threw it back, her tiny arms sent the ball flying harder than intended, straight into Claire's face. Smack! Claire stumbled back, landing on the grass with a dazed expression. A sharp sting shot through her nose, and when she touched it, she felt the warm trickle of blood. Isabella's eyes went wide with horror. "Yaya!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Tears welled up instantly, spilling over as she ran to Claire, sobbing uncontrollably. William appeared almost immediately, his long strides closing the distance in seconds. "Are you okay?" His voice was firm but edged with concern. Claire winced, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I'm fine, sir. Just a little accident." Isabella, however, wasn't convinced. She buried her face in William's chest, sobbing. It was an accident. I didn't mean to," she hiccuped between gasps. William scooped her up effortlessly. "Shh, it's okay, baby," he murmured, rubbing circles on her back. Then, turning to Claire, he added, "Come inside, let's get that cleaned up." Inside the house, William settled Isabella onto the couch, but the little girl was still trembling. Uncle William, is Yaya going to die?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William let out a low chuckle, ruffling her hair. "Claire, die from a volleyball? No way." He cast an exaggerated glance toward the hallway. "She's a superwoman. I bet she's already up and walking." "Really?" Isabella sniffled. "Really?" he assured her. Just then, Claire reappeared, fresh from washing up. She had changed into a clean shirt, her face free of blood. Despite the incident, she managed a warm smile. "See?" she said gently. "I'm perfectly fine." Isabella wasted no time in running into her arms. "Sorry again, Yaya," she whispered against Claire's waist. Claire knelt to meet her at eye level, smoothing the little girl's hair. "It's okay, baby. Let's go wash up for dinner, all right?" Hand in hand, they walked upstairs, leaving William watching them from the couch. A strange warmth settled in his chest as he observed Claire with Isabella. She had already built a bond with his niece, something Lyra had never quite managed. Would she ever? The thought lingered longer than he expected, an unexpected sight. The next morning, William stepped into the living room and paused mid-stride. His mother was lounging on the couch, sipping wine, while Claire sat beside her, expertly massaging her legs. The two of them were deep in conversation, laughing as if they had been close for years. William narrowed his eyes. Since when did Isabella's nanny get so chummy with his mother? "What's going on here?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Mom, why is Isabella's nanny giving you a massage?" Mrs. Genevieve glanced at him lazily, swirling the wine in her glass. "Oh, hush, William. Claire's good with her hands. Besides, I'm feeling too lazy to go to the spa today." His frown deepened. "You never skip your spa appointments. Are you planning something?" She smirked but said nothing, merely sipping her wine with amusement. Changing the subject, she remarked, "I heard you're going out with Lyra today." William nodded. "Yeah, she wants to check out some condos and we might drop by for dinner later, so please behave," he joked, though there was a thinly veiled tension in his voice. Mrs. Genevieve lifted a perfectly arched brow, but didn't comment. William leaned down, pressing a kiss to Isabella's forehead, before pecking his mother on the cheek. Then, with one last glance at Claire, he left. The moment the door shut, Mrs. Genevieve exhaled sharply. "That fiancé of his," she muttered under her breath, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Lyra's reluctance." Later that afternoon, William picked Lyra up from her house. As always, she was dressed to impress, her form-fitting dress, flawless makeup, and designer bag making it clear she had put effort into her appearance. They had planned to spend the day checking out potential condos for their future home, something Lyra had been pressing for since their engagement. As they drove, William cleared his throat. "Babe, my mom invited you to dinner tonight." Lyra let out a groan, throwing her head back dramatically. Ugh, why? I told you, I don't like being around your mother. She clearly hates me. Can't we just skip it? William tightened his grip on the steering wheel. How will she ever accept you if you don't even try? He sighed, glancing at her. We're about to get married, Lyra. It would be better if you at least put in an effort to get along with my mom and with Isabella. Lyra rolled her eyes, her tone turning defensive. I only care about you, William. You're all that matters to me. Your family has never given me a real chance, especially your mother. Why force something that's never going to work? I'm not going to beg her to like me. William's jaw clenched. If you love me, then at least try to love the people I value. Maybe start with dinner. She huffed, clearly annoyed. Fine, I'll come. But promise me that once we're married, we're getting our own place. I don't want to live in that house with your overbearing mother hovering over us. William exhaled, rubbing his temple. All right, he muttered, but something in the pit of his stomach felt uneasy. Meanwhile, at the Genevieve home, Claire, oblivious to the brewing tension in William's love life, remained seated with Mrs. Genevieve Little. Did she know tonight's dinner would be far more interesting than expected? A ticking clock. Mrs. Genevieve took a slow sip of her wine before fixing Claire with a pointed stare. Are you doing anything to make William change his mind about the wedding? Claire set aside the bottle of lotion she had been using to massage the older woman's feet. She wiped her hands on a towel, meeting Mrs. Genevieve's expectant gaze. I'm working on a plan, Claire said evenly. Mrs. Genevieve waved a hand impatiently. Then work faster. There's only a month left, and once the wedding happens, there's no turning back. I can't let my granddaughter suffer the way I did when I was younger. Claire paused, studying the older woman's face. Beneath the carefully controlled expression, she saw the unspoken fear. The fear that Isabella would grow up under the care of a stepmother who might never truly accept her. Claire followed Mrs. Genevieve's gaze toward Isabella, who was happily playing nearby, unaware of the silent battle unfolding around her. A twinge of sympathy bloomed in Claire's chest. Whatever personal conflicts existed in this household, one thing was certain. Isabella deserved to be loved and protected. An unwelcome guest. By nightfall, the house was alive with activity as William finally returned, this time with Lyra by his side. Claire, carrying Isabella in her arms, watched them step through the front door. Lyra was undeniably stunning, tall, slim, and effortlessly elegant. Her fitted dress hugged her curves in all the right places, the deep neckline offering a teasing glimpse of her figure. Claire's eyes flickered down briefly, catching sight of Lyra's long, smooth legs, before snapping back up with mild annoyance at herself. Why am I even noticing? Good evening, Mrs. Genevieve, Lyra greeted, stepping forward with a dazzling smile. She leaned in for the customary cheek-to-cheek greeting, her perfume subtly filling the air. Claire, still holding Isabella, didn't miss the faint, almost imperceptible cringe on Mrs. Genevieve's face, like someone enduring something unpleasant out of sheer politeness. Oh, Lay, I missed you, Lyra suddenly cooed, turning her attention to Isabella. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a neatly wrapped paper bag. I bought you candy and chocolates, your favorites, right? Claire instinctively took the bag from Lyra before Isabella could grab it. I'm her nanny, she introduced herself, but Lyra barely acknowledged her. Instead, she turned back to William, slipping an arm through his. Mrs. Genevieve clapped her hands lightly. Let's eat, she said, taking the lead toward the dining table. Claire remained close to Isabella, watching as the little girl's excitement over the treats quickly faded in the presence of the unfamiliar woman. Dinner, tensions. The long dining table was set beautifully, the soft glow of the chandelier illuminating the dishes arranged in an elegant spread. Claire placed the bag of chocolates beside Isabella's plate, while William served his niece a portion of rice. Lyra, however, stopped him before he could serve her. I'm on a diet, babe, she said with a small pout, gently pushing the rice back onto his plate. If I gain even a little weight, my wedding gown won't fit. William merely chuckled, cutting up a piece of steak for her instead. His expression was amused yet faintly indulgent, as if he'd heard this concern 100 times before. Lyra beamed at him adoringly. Claire, sitting across from them, resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Seriously? Lyra was already slim, practically model thin, yet she seemed obsessed with maintaining a weight that was probably unhealthy. She glanced at Mrs. Genevieve, who remained silent but observed the interaction with mild disapproval. Claire hid a smirk. This dinner was going to be interesting. A strained dinner. This is delicious. Mrs. Genevieve, did you prepare this? Lyra asked with a friendly smile, her tone laced with just enough warmth to sound polite. Mrs. Genevieve barely spared her a glance. No, we have 2 chefs here. I don't need to cook, she replied curtly before returning to her meal. Lyra's smile faltered for half a second, but she quickly masked it. Across the table, Isabella tugged at Claire's sleeve. Claire, I want shrimp. Can you peel it for me? Claire pulled a few buttered shrimp onto a separate plate, expertly peeling them before setting them in front of the little girl. Eat it all, okay? It's not good to waste food, she reminded her gently. Isabella nodded, happily digging in. Claire, have some dinner too, William said, his voice drawing Claire's attention. Lyra glanced at her as well, her lips pressing together in something that wasn't quite a smile. Yes, Claire, please join us, Mrs. Genevieve added with a small, deliberate nod. Isabella can feed herself now. Claire caught the way Lyra arched an eyebrow, but chose to ignore it. She was actually hungry, so she appreciated the invitation. Nanny, I want steak too, Isabella piped up between bites. Here, have what's left of mine, Lyra offered, pushing her half-eaten portion toward the child. Yuck, that's gross, Isabella blurted, wrinkling her nose. Claire stifled a laugh and quickly cut a fresh piece from her own plate instead. Here you go, Isabella beamed. Thank you, Nanny, you're the best, she giggled, making Claire chuckle along with her. Lyra, however, didn't look amused. A clash of wills. William, I should probably head out. I still have to send out more wedding invitations, Lyra announced suddenly, setting down her utensils. Claire noticed that William wasn't even done eating yet. Across the table, Mrs. Genevieve's expression darkened. Oh, I mean, after William finishes, of course, Lyra added hastily, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mrs. Genevieve placed her fork down with deliberate slowness. Stop acting like you manage my son's entire schedule, she said, her tone clipped. He's not the only one with things to do. Lyra stiffened. But Mrs. Genevieve wasn't finished. William is far busier running the family business than you'll ever be. If you're so worried about time, maybe you shouldn't have bothered coming here at all. Mom, William interjected, setting down his fork. He exhaled sharply, grabbing his napkin and wiping his mouth before standing. I can't believe you'd interrupt just to scold Lyra over how she's talking about her schedule. Mrs. Genevieve shook her head, her irritation clear. All I want is for her to act properly, she said simply, turning away from them. Mom, William called out, but she didn't look back. A heavy silence settled over the table. Claire, still seated, kept her gaze lowered as she picked at her food, doing her best to remain invisible amidst the quiet storm. This dinner had definitely taken a turn. Fractures and resolutions. She really hates me, William. I didn't even want to come here, but you insisted, Lyra said, her voice quieter now but laced with frustration. Stop it, William sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I just want you two to get along. Maybe it's tough in the beginning, but eventually she'll accept you. Lyra let out a bitter laugh. Accept me? Did you see how she talked to me just now? The way she looked at me? She even smiled at that nanny and not at me. It's like she wants to stab me with a knife. Her voice rose, and then, with venom, she added, I've had enough, William. If your mother hates me, I hate her too, especially that kid. She pointed at Isabella, who sat quietly, unaware that she had done anything wrong. Claire's patience snapped. She immediately covered Isabella's ears and turned to Lyra, her voice firm. Why bring a child into your frustration? Have you ever asked yourself why Mrs. Genevieve dislikes you so much? Claire, stop, William interrupted, trying to keep things from escalating. Take Isabella upstairs. Lyra's eyes blazed with fury. I can't believe this. What right does your nanny have to talk to me like that? William, are you just going to stand there and do nothing while she disrespects me? William exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Let's go home, Lyra, he said, standing up and leading her toward the door. Claire remained frozen in place, hearing Lyra's last angry words echo in her mind. When she finally looked down, she saw tears welling in Isabella's eyes. She's an evil witch, Nanny, Isabella whispered, voice trembling. She even pinched my leg before because she said I was making too much noise. It hurt so bad I couldn't cry. Claire's heart clenched. So that was why Isabella disliked Lyra. "Don't worry, baby," she murmured, stroking the child's hair. "I'll make sure that woman never sets foot in this house again." A departure and a plan. The next morning, Mrs. Genevieve left for Europe. She and William still hadn't spoken much since the disastrous dinner, but before she boarded her flight, she made one thing clear. "By the time I return, I expect Lyra to be out of my son's life." Claire understood the weight of those words. She knew it was time. That evening, after a long day, she took a shower in her room, changed into soft pajamas, and quietly made her way upstairs to Lyra's room. She heard a loud crash behind her. "Sir!" Claire gasped, rushing to William's side. He was sprawled on the floor, obviously intoxicated. She helped him up and guided him to his bedroom. Once inside, she laid him carefully on the bed and sat at the edge, observing his serene face. He had been occupying her thoughts ever since that night, their first kiss. But she reminded herself not to fall for him. She was here with a purpose, to entice him, to end his engagement. Yet the boundaries blurred whenever he was close. She brushed her fingers lightly over his cheek, then his lips, recalling how he had kissed her back with such intensity in the elevator. "I want to feel them again," she murmured. Perhaps he wouldn't recall anything in the morning. He was utterly wasted. Wasn't this exactly what she was meant to do? Tempt him until he abandoned Lyra? Claire locked the door, unfastened his shirt, and felt a mix of anticipation and unease. She knew she had already crossed a line. Closing her eyes, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his. She kissed him slowly, but William groaned, stirring. His eyelids fluttered open. Claire froze, ready to pull away, but he murmured her name and slipped a hand behind her head, responding to her kiss with passion. Their positions shifted. He rolled her beneath him and lifted her nightshirt, sliding it off completely. His lips trailed heated kisses down her skin, and Claire arched her back, moaning as he explored her curves with his hands. When his mouth joined in, she grasped his shoulders, gasping as he drew soft whimpers from her. William moved lower, removing her last piece of clothing and flicking his tongue over her most sensitive spot. Her hips jerked from the overwhelming sensation. Then she felt his hardness pressing at her entrance, and she bit her lip at the sharp twinge as he pushed inside. She clung to the pillows, surrendering to the fiery rhythm of their bodies until they both reached the peak together. Moments later, William drifted into a deep slumber, his breathing steady and calm. Claire sat beside him for a moment, watching the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. She tucked the blanket around him, ensuring he was warm before slipping out of the room. An unexpected sense of contentment washed over her, an unfamiliar yet oddly comforting feeling. She felt no regret for what had transpired. The next morning, Claire woke to a dull ache in her limbs, her eyelids heavy with sleep. As she blinked them open, the sight before her sent a jolt through her system. William was sitting on the edge of Isabella's bed, watching her intently. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of his gaze made her heart pound. She quickly sat upright, instinctively glancing around. Isabella was nowhere to be seen. "Sir, do you need something?" she asked, her voice slightly hoarse from sleep. William's jaw tightened. "She's outside with Sarah," he said quietly. "Now let's talk about us." Claire's breath hitched. "Us?" she echoed, cautiously. William ran a hand through his disheveled hair, exhaling sharply. "What happened last night? It wasn't just a dream." His voice was low, almost hesitant. Then, as if searching for confirmation, he added, "I saw the blood on my blanket." The color drained from Claire's face. She lowered her gaze, suddenly feeling exposed. Before she could pull herself together, William reached for her wrist, his grip firm but not forceful. "I'm getting married, Claire," he said, his voice laced with turmoil. "I can't take responsibility for what happened between us." A sharp pain twisted in Claire's chest, but she refused to let it show. She nodded, forcing a small, detached smile. "I know," she murmured. "You don't have to. I wanted it too." She swallowed, composing herself. "And don't worry, I won't hold you to anything. Even if I did, it wouldn't change anything. My job is what it is, and we only met recently. Soon, I'll be gone, back to where I belong." She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Back to the club, where I work as an entertainer." William's grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "Why?" His voice was strained. "Why did you let it happen?" His piercing gaze searched her face. "And why are you even here? Why are you working at that club?" Claire met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "I'm poor, William," she admitted, her voice steady despite the vulnerability of her words. "I needed money. I took this job to be Isabella's nanny, not knowing you lived here." A bitter smile flickered across her lips as she gently pried her wrist from his grasp. "So, don't worry, I won't mess with your head anymore. I'll just leave." She turned away before he could say another word, before he could see the silent storm brewing in her eyes. Without looking back, she walked out of the room, found Isabella in the dining area, and quietly helped her eat breakfast, acting as if nothing had changed. But something had. And Claire knew that the moment Mrs. Genevieve returned, she would leave this house, paycheck or not. William had made it clear where she stood, and she refused to remain in a place where she wasn't wanted. 2 weeks passed, and Mrs. Genevieve finally returned from Europe. The moment Claire heard the sound of her luggage being wheeled into the house, she knew it was time. Her decision had already been made. Summoning all her courage, she knocked on Mrs. Genevieve's door and stepped inside when called. The older woman glanced up from her vanity, eyeing Claire with mild curiosity. "You're quitting?" Mrs. Genevieve asked, setting down a pearl earring she had been fastening. "Why, did something happen?" Claire lowered her gaze, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. "I'm going back to the club, ma'am," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do what you asked. He really loves his fiancée, and I refuse to be the reason they break up. Please, just let me go." She swallowed hard before adding, "It's all right if I don't get paid. Just let me leave." Mrs. Genevieve studied her for a long moment, then let out a slow, weary sigh. "All right," she murmured, leaning back in her chair. "I already spoke with his father, and there's nothing more I can do. He made his choice." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I suppose I'll just keep looking after Isabella for as long as I can." At the mention of the little girl, Claire's heart clenched painfully. She had grown so attached to Isabella in such a short time. The thought of leaving her behind was unbearable, but there was no other way. Mrs. Genevieve pulled open a drawer and retrieved a white envelope. She extended it toward Claire. "Even though you didn't succeed in breaking them up, you did take excellent care of Isabella," she said with rare sincerity. "You deserve the compensation I promised." Claire hesitated for only a second before reaching for the envelope. Just as her fingers brushed against it, the door swung open, with a force that sent a sharp jolt through her chest. "William." Her breath caught as he stepped inside, his presence sucking the air from the room. His stormy gaze locked onto her, unreadable yet seething with emotion. "William," Mrs. Genevieve greeted him, her voice calm but wary. He ignored his mother completely. His piercing stare was fixed on Claire. "So it's true," he muttered, his voice edged with anger. "What I heard, it wasn't a lie. You were paid by my mother to break up Lyra and me." Claire's throat tightened. She said nothing. "Answer me," he demanded, stepping closer. Before she could find the words, Mrs. Genevieve intervened. "Don't be mad at her. I'm the one responsible," she admitted, standing from her chair. But William didn't even glance at her. His gaze flickered downward, noticing the envelope still clutched in Claire's trembling hand. His expression darkened. "Is that payment for what happened between us?" His voice was thick with contempt. "Was it all about money for you?" His jaw clenched, his eyes burning with accusation. "What if I told you I already broke up with Lyra? Would that thrill you? Would my mother give you a bonus?" Claire flinched, as if he had struck her. She couldn't stop the tears from spilling down her cheeks. Mrs. Genevieve's sharp inhale cut through the tension. "You slept together?" William let out a bitter laugh, his gaze never leaving Claire's tear-streaked face. "Oh, so that's why she kissed me first?" he sneered. "She told me not to worry about taking responsibility because apparently you told her to do it." He turned to his mother, his voice dripping with venom. "And now what? You're sending her away like nothing happened?" Claire gripped the envelope so tightly that the edges crumpled in her hands. Shame, pain, and something far more devastating swirled in her chest, threatening to consume her. She had known this moment would come, but she had never expected it to hurt this much. "I already broke up with Lyra because I can't get Claire out of my head." William's voice trembled with frustration, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Don't you realize that? And now I find out it was all just part of some twisted scheme?" His shoulders slumped as he exhaled sharply, his fury giving way to something that looked a lot like heartbreak. He turned away, shaking his head. I'm such an idiot, he muttered under his breath before striding out of the room, ignoring his mother's pleas to come back. Claire stood frozen, her hands trembling. She could barely breathe past the lump in her throat. I'm sorry, Mrs. Genevieve, she choked out, forcing the words past her tightening chest. Don't worry, I know I'm not right for your son. I'll go now. She turned on her heel and fled before she lost the last shred of composure she had left. Inside her room, she frantically stuffed her belongings into a bag, her vision blurred with tears. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay, to fight, but she knew there was no place for her here anymore. Not after this. When she descended the staircase, a small, desperate voice stopped her in her tracks. Nanny, are you leaving me? Isabella's sobs shattered Claire's resolve. Don't go. Claire's heart clenched as she knelt, cupping the little girl's tear-streaked face. Be strong, okay? She whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Isabella's damp cheek. Your grandma and your uncle love you very much. And don't worry, when I can, I'll come visit. Stop lying to her and leave. Claire flinched at the iciness in William's voice. She turned her gaze upward, meeting his hardened expression as he stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now held nothing but cold detachment. Sir, she started, her voice barely a whisper. I said leave, he repeated, his tone sharper this time. A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek, but she refused to let him see her break. Swallowing her pain, she shouldered her bag and stepped through the door. Nanny! Nanny! Isabella's cries echoed behind her, piercing her heart like a dagger. Claire, don't leave me! Claire turned back, but before she could say anything, William scooped the little girl into his arms, holding her back as she thrashed and sobbed. With her heart in pieces, Claire forced herself forward. She flagged down a local ride and climbed in without looking back. Once alone, the dam broke. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let out a silent, gut-wrenching sob. It felt like she had left her entire soul behind in that mansion, but there was no turning back. Her family needed her. She had to forget whatever had happened between her and William. A week later, Claire stepped through the doors of the Ember Lounge once more. Miss Lyra, the club owner beamed at her, arms wide in welcome. You have no idea how many customers have been asking about you. Claire mustered a small smile, masking the ache that still lingered in her chest. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. You'd better work hard tonight, Daniel, one of the staff, teased as he passed by. I heard you already have a client lined up. Claire forced a chuckle, slipping back into the persona she had abandoned weeks ago. Lyra. The name felt foreign on her tongue now. But Claire knew this was her life, and whatever had happened with William, it was time to bury it. I will. But I'm done with the magic pills. If anything goes wrong again, Miss Lyra might kick me out, Claire said firmly, adjusting the strap of her dress. I still need to save up, open my own business, and get out of this place for good. I can't do this forever. I want a decent life. That evening, as Claire stood before the vanity in the dressing room, she examined her reflection. The dress she had bought hugged her curves perfectly. Seductive, elegant, just the right balance of allure and mystery. Perfect. Lyra had hinted that her next client was wealthy, and if she played her cards right, he might become a regular. Regulars meant stability, predictability, bigger tips. She reached for her purse, discreetly slipping a condom inside. She wasn't naive. She had seen too many girls take risks, only to end up regretting it. Whatever happened tonight, she wouldn't let it ruin her future. Claire, there you are. Miss Lyra's voice cut through the buzz of the club. Your VIP guest has been waiting. Claire exhaled slowly, her lips curving into a practiced, sultry smile. Coming, she called back, shaking off any lingering hesitation. With a steadying breath, she strode toward the VIP lounge, heels clicking against the polished floor. She pushed the door open and froze. The air left her lungs. Sitting on the plush leather couch, one arm draped over the backrest, was William. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with unreadable emotion. Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. She knew she should turn and walk away, run if necessary, but it was too late. He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. I'm paying for your time, he said coldly, so come sit. Her fingers curled into her palm, For a fleeting second, she considered calling for Miss Lyra, telling her she couldn't do this, but she knew how that would end. She had no choice but to play along. Swallowing hard, she stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. "Sit," he ordered again, his voice low, firm. Claire hesitated before taking a slow, reluctant step forward. The moment she was close enough, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her down beside him, his grip firm, possessive. Then, without warning, his lips crashed against hers. The kiss was rough, demanding. His teeth grazed her lower lip, the force of it sending a shiver down her spine. Claire didn't resist. He was, after all, a paying customer. She had kissed men for far less, but just as suddenly as it started, he pulled away. His breath was ragged, his hands trembling slightly as he ran them through his hair. "I'm going insane, Claire," he muttered, his voice raw. "No matter how much I try to hate you for what you did, for the way you played me, I can't stop wanting you." His fingers clenched into fists. "I've come here night after night searching for you. Why?" Claire's gaze flickered to the empty bottles littering the table. He had been drinking. Heavily. Her heart twisted. Before she could say anything, William abruptly stood and seized her hand. William? But he didn't let go. Without another word, he pulled her out of the VIP lounge, striding through the club as if nothing else existed. She barely had time to catch her breath before he led her outside, his grip unrelenting. They climbed into his car, the silence thick, electric. Then, in a blur, they were parked in front of a hotel. William stepped out, walked around to her side, and opened the door. His gaze met hers, intense, desperate, full of something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And without hesitation, he took her hand and led her inside. Claire offered no protest. She let him take her hand, let him lead her inside the dimly lit hotel room. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, emotions they had both fought too long to suppress. As soon as the door clicked shut behind them, William turned to her, his gaze burning with need. "Make love to me," he murmured. "This time, do it because you want to." Claire's breath hitched. His words, so raw and vulnerable, struck something deep inside her. She rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, her fingers threading through his hair. He responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against him as their bodies molded together. As she reached for the buttons of his shirt, his hands caught hers, trembling slightly. "Don't..." His voice was almost a plea. "Don't treat me like one of your customers." His forehead rested against hers. "I'll pay you double if you make me feel like I'm more than just a job to you." Claire's heart twisted at the desperation in his words. She stepped back and, without breaking eye contact, slipped her dress off her shoulders, letting it pool at her feet. The rest of her clothes followed, discarded carelessly as she moved toward him with newfound purpose. She pushed him onto the bed and straddled him, watching the way his breath hitched as she traced her fingers down his chest. That night, she made sure he would never forget her, branding herself onto his skin, his soul, in a way no one else ever had. Moans filled the room, tangled with whispers and gasps as they lost themselves in each other again and again, their bodies speaking what their hearts couldn't yet put into words. Morning came too soon. Claire stirred, her body sore, her mind hazy with exhaustion and something dangerously close to contentment. She moved to sit up, but before she could slip out of bed, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back into the warmth of the sheets. "Stay," William murmured, his voice thick with sleep. She turned to face him, her heart skipping as she took in his disheveled hair, his bare chest, the way his gaze softened when it met hers. "Marry me, Claire." Her breath caught. "What?" she whispered. "I won't let you go back to that club." His fingers traced lazy circles on her hip. "Be my wife, and I'll give you everything." Claire sat up, searching his face, trying to decipher whether he was serious or still caught in the haze of last night. She watched as he reached up, unclasping the thin chain around his neck. A simple ring dangled from it, the gold slightly worn but gleaming in the morning light. "It's from my mom," he admitted. "She told me that when I found the right woman, I should give it to her." He cupped her cheek, brushing away a stray strand of hair. "Isabella misses you," he said softly. "She wants to see you again." Claire swallowed hard, her heart warring with her mind. "But what about Lyra?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure? It's been over since that night at dinner, he interrupted firmly. How can I marry someone who disrespects my family, someone who can't accept the people that matter to me? He exhaled, shaking his head. I've talked it through with my mother, and for the first time, I know exactly what I want. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, his eyes dark with determination. I've found you, Claire, and now that I have, I don't want to lose you. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. Please, marry me. Tears blurred her vision, emotions crashing over her like a tidal wave. Slowly she nodded. A relieved laugh escaped William as he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he never wanted to let go. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his mother's blessing, his silent promise, and as their lips met once more, they surrendered to their desire all over again. This time, there was no hesitation. No uncertainty, only love. After that night, Claire left the Ember Lounge for good. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. She was done with that life. She moved back into the Genevieve mansion, not as Isabella's nanny, but as William's fiancée. Though her past might have raised eyebrows elsewhere, within these walls she was welcomed warmly. Even Mrs. Genevieve, who had once orchestrated a different future for her son, embraced Claire with an acceptance she never expected. 2 months passed in a blissful whirlwind, and the wedding day loomed near. One morning, Claire jolted awake, a wave of nausea hitting her hard. She barely had time to grab the edge of the bed before rushing to the bathroom, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder as she fell to her knees in front of the toilet. Claire? William's groggy voice came from the bed. Within seconds, he was beside her, kneeling as he gently rubbed her back. Babe, what's wrong? She gasped for air, wiping her mouth as her mind raced. Then, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, she did a quick calculation of her cycle. Her heart pounded. Oh my God. A shaky hand moved to her stomach, her fingers splayed over the soft curve. William's concern deepened. Does it hurt? Did you eat something bad last night? Claire swallowed, still processing the realization. Then, despite the nervous flutter in her chest, she smirked playfully. No, I only ate your hot dog, she teased. His brow furrowed. Claire, I'm serious, he scolded, though his lips twitched, fighting a smile. She inhaled deeply and met his gaze. William, I think I'm pregnant. For a moment he just stared at her, as if his brain hadn't fully caught up. Then his eyes widened and he blinked rapidly. Wait, really? His voice rose slightly. We need to confirm it. They hurried to get dressed and drove straight to a nearby clinic. The minutes stretched endlessly as they waited, but when the doctor finally returned with the results, Claire felt her whole world shift. She was almost 3 weeks along. William looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Without hesitation, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his lips pressing against her temple as he laughed breathlessly. The joy in his eyes was undeniable. I'm going to be a dad, he whispered in awe, before immediately pulling out his phone to call his mother. When they returned home, William sat Isabella down and explained everything. The little girl gasped in delight, clapping her hands. I get to be a big sister? She exclaimed, bouncing excitedly on the couch. Claire's heart swelled at the sight. The warmth, the love, everything felt so right. She didn't care that the baby was coming before their official wedding day. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was happy. She was loved. And for the first time in a long time, her future felt secure. William, ever the doting fiancé, became even more attentive. He accompanied her to every checkup, fussed over her meals, and pampered her at every opportunity. Eventually, the long-awaited wedding arrived. The ceremony was breathtaking, filled with family, love, and promises of forever. Afterward, the couple decided to stay at the mansion, making it their home. Shortly after, Mrs. Genevieve and her husband left for Europe, taking Isabella along for a well-deserved vacation. They promised to bring her back in time for Christmas, but until then, the house belonged solely to William and Claire. For the first time, they were completely alone. One evening, William arrived home after a long day at work. The house was dimly lit, the scent of freshly cooked food lingering in the air. As he stepped inside, Claire greeted him at the door, slipping her arms around his neck before pressing a lingering kiss to his lips. "Welcome home," she murmured. He smiled against her lips before pulling back slightly. "How was your day?" "It was okay," she exhaled softly, resting her head against his chest. "Just a little lonely. The place feels so empty without Isabella." William chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I know what you mean. It doesn't feel the same without her running around causing chaos. She nodded, then placed a hand over her stomach where a tiny life was growing. But soon, we won't be alone anymore. His expression softened as he placed his hand over hers. No, we won't, he agreed. And I wouldn't trade this for anything. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's warmth, Claire knew this was the life she had always dreamed of, and now it was finally hers. After dinner, they made their way upstairs, William's hand resting protectively on the small of Claire's back. As they entered their bedroom, he glanced at her with a knowing smile. By the way, he began, settling onto the edge of the bed. I found a good place near a school where your parents and siblings can move. It's a nice neighborhood, and they could open a small store there. It would be convenient for your brothers and sisters. Claire paused, touched by his thoughtfulness. Hun, you don't have to do that, she said gently, sitting beside him. I can still work and help support them. You're not obligated. William reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. His grip was warm, steady. I know I'm not obligated to your family, he admitted, but I want to do this. Not just for them, but for us and our baby. I want you to focus on our child without worrying about finances. Your parents are hard-working people, and I'm happy to lend a hand. Let me do this for you. Claire felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. Her chest tightened with emotion as she gazed at the man who had changed her life in ways she never thought possible. He had pulled her from a past she had despised, loved her without judgment, and now he was ensuring the happiness of her family as well. She cupped his face, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I don't know what I did to deserve you, she whispered. William smiled, pressing a kiss to her palm. You deserve the world, Claire, and I intend to give it to you. 7 months later, the moment they had been waiting for finally arrived. Claire gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, Beau. William was beside himself with joy, his hands trembling as he held their son for the first time. The tiny newborn had his father's striking features, a miniature version of the man Claire loved. When they brought Beau home, they were greeted with open arms. Mrs. Genevieve and her husband had returned from their travels, eager to welcome their grandson, and Isabella practically vibrated with excitement. He's so cute, Isabella squealed, bouncing on her toes as she peeked into the crib. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. My new little brother. Can I pinch his chubby cheeks? Just a little? Claire laughed through the happy tears welling in her eyes. The warmth, the love. This was more than she had ever dared to dream of. William wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close as he gazed down at their son. Our baby is so cute, he murmured, resting his head on her shoulder. Claire smiled, leaning into his embrace. Yes, and he looks exactly like you. William chuckled, twirling her around so she was facing him. His gaze softened as he took in her face, still slightly flushed from the exhaustion of childbirth. Good thing he didn't take after me too much, he teased. If he looked like you, he'd be way too beautiful for his own good. Claire rolled her eyes, swatting playfully at his arm. Pregnancy or not, even if he did look like me, he'd still be adorable, she retorted. William grinned, dipping his head to press a kiss to the tip of her nose before capturing her lips in a slow, loving kiss. From the side, Isabella groaned dramatically. Oh, baby, close your eyes, she announced to her newborn brother. Mommy and Daddy are kissing. It's so gross. William and Claire burst into laughter, their happiness filling the room. Life had given Claire more than she ever imagined, and as she stood there in the embrace of her husband, surrounded by family, she knew one thing for certain. She had finally found her forever. And just like that, Claire's life took a turn she never expected. From struggling to make ends meet to finding love, family, and purpose, her journey proves that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest happiness. A reminder that no matter where you come from, you deserve love, respect, and a future you can be proud of. What do you think? Should Claire have trusted William from the start, or did everything happen the way it was meant to? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more.